Ancient biblical prophets wrote about the future. Today, theologians are poring over those scriptures with a firm belief that their prophecies are coming to pass. Journey now into the world of eschatology on Prophecy in the News with author and lecturer J.R. Church.
On today's Prophecy in the News, we're going to take you through the book of Numbers in a most unusual way. We're going to look at the Torah designs in the book of Numbers. And from programs past, we have looked at the Torah designs in Genesis, the Torah designs in Exodus, the Torah designs in Leviticus, and today the Torah designs in the book of Numbers. That is, each chapter seems to fit a framework. The theme of Genesis can be found in chapters 1, 6, 11, 16, 21, 26, and chapter 31. The theme of Exodus in chapters 2, 7, etc., and the theme of Leviticus in chapters 3, 8, etc. Gary Stearman is here to discuss with me the Torah designs and Numbers.
The Torah design, the Torah, of course, being what we call the Pentateuch, or the 5 books of Moses. They are 5 books, but they are really a 5-fold design. And the design can't be overlooked. Genesis is the book of beginnings, but J.R., you know, Genesis is not just beginnings. It also talks about sin and division. And there's a flood in there. And then there is a rebirth. And then there's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And they go through all kinds of foibles. But in general, what you have in Genesis is the theme of beginnings along with the sin of man, which is the setting for redemption. Exodus, then, is the book of deliverance and redemption. Leviticus is the book of holiness, that is, talks about sanctification, walking with God. Numbers is the book that speaks of the wilderness march, and it focuses on sin. Deuteronomy is the summation, speaks of judgment and the establishment of the kingdom. And so you have a 5-fold pattern, and we find this expressed over and over again in Scripture.
The important thing about this Torah design is that nobody's ever seen it before. You will not find this in anybody's commentary. So the program you're going to hear today is not old hat, so to speak. We're plowing new ground. We're introducing you to a subject that you have never heard before. We can guarantee this. So you'll certainly want to stay with us as we go through these. And I hope that our study of these 36 chapters are not overwhelming to you, but what we do want you to see is this unique Torah design used by Moses in the writing of this 4th book of the 5 books of Moses. And Gary, it's interesting to me that each of these Torah designs, that is, the first 5 chapters go through Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, but from a Numbers point of view.
Exactly.
Genesis goes through, you know, the first chapter of Genesis is a Genesis chapter. Chapter 2 of Genesis is an Exodus chapter. Chapter 3 is a Leviticus chapter. Chapter 4 is a Numbers chapter. And chapter 5 a Deuteronomy chapter. But they look at those 5 themes from a Genesis perspective. Exodus looks at those 5 themes and its 5 chapter designs from an Exodus, our redemption viewpoint. Leviticus from a Leviticus viewpoint. Now from the wilderness journey comes this incredible story of the Torah designs. And you know, it's got to be of God. No man could have written the book and produced these Torah designs.
And you know, this book, you might ask yourself, what's Numbers all about? Well, it's about the wilderness journey. In fact, the Hebrew name for the book is Bamidbar, which means in the wilderness. We call it Numbers because in the Septuagint, the Greeks named or titled this book Arithmoi, where we get our word arithmetic. And we took arithmoi and turned it into Numbers, because it speaks of taking a census or numbering the people. Now, chapter 1, verses 1 through 3 of Numbers speak of numbering the people. And this is a beginning or opening theme reflecting Genesis.
This actually introduces the people at the beginning of the 40 years, right after their exodus out of Egypt. And so this is a new beginning for a new people and a new nation. A census is taken. And this same theme of Genesis can also be seen in chapter 6. And there, Gary, we see another new beginning, don't we?
We certainly do. In chapter 6, we have a new beginning that speaks of the Nazirite vow. Sanctification of the Nazirite, one who makes a vow in order to perform a righteous act. And this righteous act is, shall we say, an act of creation in the program of God. In other words, a Nazirite almost takes upon himself the person of God in order to do a creative act. And so here's the theme of creation.
You know, in the theme of creation, God made man and he put them in the garden and he said, God blessed them and he said, be fruitful and multiply. Well, listen to the last few verses of chapter 6. This is the same kind of deity blessing. The Lord bless thee and keep thee. The Lord make his face to shine upon thee and be gracious unto thee. The Lord lift up his countenance upon thee and give thee peace. So you can just feel the Genesis theme as it flows here. Let's look at chapter 11, Gary, and the Genesis theme in chapter 11.
Chapter 11 begins something brand new. As a matter of fact, this is a dividing point in this book. The first 10 chapters of Numbers are enumeration and preparing to move out on the march. But J.R., starting in chapter 11, there is a great fall. Israel complains about virtually everything, about the food, about the people, and about the environment, the circumstances, and about no water. They start out.
Genesis theme, isn't it?
It is a Genesis theme, yeah.
Now, let's look at chapter 16 and the Genesis theme of that chapter.
And here we have a rebellion. And this is the story of Korah, who wanted to set himself up as the leader of the people against Moses and Aaron. And God judged Korah. Now we find here a brand new, again, a new beginning with the judgment of Korah.
And you know, this seems like what Satan did to the Lord, you know, and he rebelled. Rebellion was found in his heart. Korah decided to split the church, so to speak. He built his own tabernacle. He took off, he wooed away as many followers as he could to himself. So it's certainly a Genesis theme in chapter 16. Chapter 21 now. This is a fascinating Genesis
now,
theme.
In every one of these Genesis themes, we find a new departure, but J.R., we also find conflict. And here we have Israel versus the Canaanites. In the last one, it was Moses and Aaron versus Korah. Here it's Israel versus the Canaanites. And we have in this chapter the story of the brazen serpent. We have another conflict at the end of the chapter with the Moabites and the Amorites. And this, again, starts off the people in a new direction.
It's certainly a Genesis theme with that serpent, isn't it?
It certainly is, yeah. Brazen serpent.
Is there a serpent in the book of Genesis?
Oh, my goodness, yes.
That's a no-brainer, I guess. Chapter 26, another Genesis chapter. Remember, every 5 chapters, we have this turnover again with another beginning of the 5 Torah themes.
And here we're turning toward the end of the book. Genesis chapter 26 echoes chapter 1, because now we're taking another census of the people, a new departure.
Numbering the people again.
Numbering
That's
the people again.
Incredible.
Yeah.
And then chapter 31, and it's Genesis theme.
And here we have, guess what, another conflict, the destruction of the Midianites. And Israel has to be purified out of all of this. And then the spoils of the conflict with the Midianites have to be divided, which creates yet another new beginning theme in the book of Numbers. And so, just as in Genesis, where you have a creation and fall, conflict and new beginning, we see this pattern over and over again.
The second chapter of Numbers has an Exodus theme to it. And this would be true not only of chapter 2, but chapter 7, chapter 12, chapter 17, chapter 22, chapter 27, and chapter 32 all have the same theme that corresponds to the themes found in the book of Exodus. Let's look at chapter 2.
Exodus, deliverance, and redemption. And here we have the layout of the camp. We have the perfect symmetrical layout of the camp with the tabernacle in the middle. North, south, east, west, tabernacle in the center. Everything is in a state of order, ready for redemption.
Tabernacle in the middle.
That's
redemption.
Right.
Wow.
Redemption.
In chapter 7, we have another Exodus theme. And here, the order of the host.
Listen, this is beautiful because chapter 7 is absolutely typical of redemption. This is Israel giving donations in order that the work of redemption may proceed in the camp. And right in the middle of all this, in verse 13, is the silver shekel offering. And since the silver shekel is the metal of redemption.
Price of redemption.
Price of redemption.
That theme had to be in one of those chapters, didn't it?
It certainly did.
And then chapter 12 is another chapter that deals with this special theme of Exodus, and we'll get to it when we return in just a moment, so don't go away. We'll be right back. We're in the Exodus chapters of the book of Numbers, and chapter 12 in particular has an Exodus theme, the theme of redemption. Gary?
It sure does. Chapter 12 is the story of Miriam, who complains about Moses' Ethiopian wife. And she complains on grounds that we don't understand, and God punishes her, turns her skin leprous, white as snow, for doing this kind of complaining. Actually, what we have here is a confirmation of what Moses was doing. God personally confirmed that Moses had made the right decision in his life and that there was a larger plan here.
And the plan, of course, was for the Ethiopians to take care of the Ark of the Covenant. They had to be Levites. They had to be of the tribe of Levi.
They had to be of the tribe of Levi.
So old Levite Moses here, he married Tharbus, the daughter of the king of Ethiopia. Flavius Josephus tells us that story, and it is definitely the theme of redemption.
Redemption.
Now let's go to chapter 17, and its redemption theme.
And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel. And at this point, when the Lord speaks unto the children of Israel, he says to have each leader of the 12 tribes take a rod and to place that rod in the ground. And only Aaron's rod budded. And here we have another confirmation. We have a confirmation of the Aaronic priesthood by the budding rod. And this, again, in this confirmation, we find the theme of redemption.
Yeah, life from the dead.
Yes.
Resurrection. Out of budding out of a rod.
Indeed.
Absolutely, it's incredible. Let's look at chapter 22 and its Exodus theme.
Now, here we have an amazing redemption. Chapter 22, King Balaam of the Midianites goes to or that is Balak, goes to Balaam, the prophet, and wants to purchase his prophetic services so that he will prophesy against Israel. Now, here's the interesting turn, because Balaam agrees to do this, to prophesy for money, but God comes to him at night and says, you go with him and prophesy just as you wish, but every word that comes out of your mouth is going to be something that I put there. And so here we have the redemption of Israel through a false prophet of all things.
Yes, how can he curse those whom God has blessed?
Exactly.
Amazing. Let's look at chapter 27 now and its Exodus theme.
Chapter 27, and let me turn to chapter 27, and this is an amazing story of special laws having to do with inheritance. We have here we don't have time to really go into the details, but we've got special laws concerning inheritance detailed in this chapter. And then we have the appointment of Joshua here. And Joshua is to be Moses' replacement. As Moses, the Lord knows in advance, Moses will not go into the promised land. Joshua will take over as leader, and the mantle of Moses is to be placed on Joshua. We find that right in this chapter, which is redemption.
And Joshua is to lead them into the promised land, not Moses. Moses represents law, Joshua represents grace, and so he, through grace representing the Lord Jesus Christ, redemption is so plain there. Let's look at chapter 32 and its Exodus theme.
And here we have the division of the land east of the Jordan, J.R., and we have here inheritance laid out in a very special way. We have detailed inheritance. And in this inheritance, there is a reward for faith. And this, again, is a redemptive theme. Themes of redemption very often involve the reward for faith. And the various tribes here are rewarded by being given certain land grants.
Now let's move on to the Leviticus chapters. That would be chapter 3, chapter 8, chapter 13, chapter 18, chapter 23, chapter 28, and chapter 33. Let's look at chapter 3 and see if we can find some Levites in there.
Now, yes, Leviticus, of course, is the book of sanctification, the book of the priesthood, and Leviticus. Think of that name when you think of the Levites. And chapter 3 speaks of the family of Aaron and the ministry of the Levites. It is a perfect Leviticus chapter.
Then chapter 8 would be the next Leviticus chapter. I wonder if we have any Aaronic Levitical priesthood.
Well, guess what? In chapter 8, we have the theme of Leviticus, the consecration of the Levites. The Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto Aaron, and say unto him, when thou lightest the lamps. And then it goes on from there. And basically, it's the consecration of the priesthood.
Is that amazing or what?
It really is amazing.
Chapter 13 would be the next Leviticus chapter, a chapter of sanctification. And what do we find there?
And here we have the sanctification of Joshua in the incident of the spies going into the promised land. We have Hoshea, son of Nun, having his name changed to Yehoshua, which adds a prefix in the name of Yahweh to his name. And this is the sanctification of Joshua, who will later be the successor to Moses.
Fits perfectly, doesn't it?
It does.
Wow. Chapter 18 would be the next Leviticus chapter in this series of 5 chapters each in these sets of Torah themes, or Pentateuchal themes, as you might know the 5 books of the Bible as a Pentateuch. These first 5 books cast their reflection upon the book of Numbers, chapter 18.
Chapter 18, a Leviticus book. The whole chapter is devoted to the remuneration of the priesthood for their priestly duties. And you really can't get more Levitical than that, J.R.
That's just incredible.
Isn't it? Isn't that amazing?
This is marvelous. You just never find anything like this in any commentaries or Bible encyclopedias. This is a first. Chapter 23 would be the next Levitical chapter.
And here, J.R., we have the story really of Balaam and Balak. And Balaam builds 7 altars at the instruction of Balak. And the idea is that these altars will be used ultimately in a ceremony to bring down a curse upon Israel. But instead, it's a 7-fold blessing, basically.
Yeah. Then we have chapter 28. Would be the next Leviticus chapter, the theme of Leviticus and sanctification in this chapter.
And let's see, we're looking at chapter 28.
The order of the offerings.
We have the order of the daily offering, the order of the weekly offering, the order of the monthly offering, and then we have the spring festivals, Passover and first fruits. And talk about a beautiful picture of sanctification in Passover and first fruits.
Now, this, of course, represents the first advent of Christ. And the very next chapter, chapter 29, which we shall see, I don't know if we're going to get to see it or not.
We're running out of time.
This represents the second coming of Christ, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
That's amazing. Well, let's look then at chapter 33 and the final Leviticus chapter in this book.
And this is the story, it's a complete rehearsal, basically, of the redemption of the people from Egypt to Sinai and beyond. And speaking of sin and redemption and sanctification of the people, and the instructions for how they will come to conquer the pagan Canaanites.
That's amazing. Let's, we only have a few minutes left, so let's just talk about Numbers and Deuteronomy for a moment. The book of Numbers casts its reflection upon chapters 4, chapter 9, chapter 14, chapter 19, chapter 24, chapter 29, and chapter 34. And let's just get a flavor for this Numbers chapter. Right? Let's talk about chapter 4 here for a moment. And how does it reflect the book of Numbers, the wilderness journey?
The wilderness journey. And what we have here is the ministry of Kohath. the ministry of the sons of Kohath. And J.R., what we've got here is a situation in which the sins of the people are going to be covered. This ministry is discussed in terms of covering the sin of the people. It's not discussed in terms of sanctification. It's not discussed in terms of remuneration of the priesthood, but rather this has the dark overtone that the people are going to be sinning and the priesthood has to cover the sin.
Now, this book of Numbers talks about the wilderness journey. So in verse 5 we have, and when the camp setteth forward. Okay?
That's it.
That's incredible.
There you go.
And let's look quickly at chapter 9. What do we have in chapter 9 that gives us the concept of the wilderness journey?
Well, we have the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night when the camp sets forward. And so we have the description of the journey itself, the wilderness journey in this chapter.
It says in verse 17, when the cloud was taken up from the tabernacle, then after that the children of Israel journeyed. So we've got the same thing again.
Right.
Let's look at chapters 5 and 10 for just a moment to give you the theme here of Deuteronomy. Chapter 5.
Chapter 5, and we're talking in Deuteronomy now about the summary judgment of things and setting things right going into the kingdom. Here we have the separation of unclean persons and separation and restitution for sin and for infidelity. In other words, setting things right at the end of days is the theme here, and of course that is the theme of Deuteronomy.
And in chapter 10, we have a Deuteronomy theme as well.
We do indeed.
This is the government of God we're talking about here.
And we have the guidance of the two silver trumpets, a Deuteronomy theme in the journey. And we have also judgment at the end of this chapter.
Yeah. A lot to study here, but it's so fascinating to show you the Torah designs throughout the book of Numbers.